Canada is the second largest country on Earth. 3.86 million square miles, most of it empty, most of it wild, most of it untouched by anything human hands have built. Nearly 90% of all Canadians live within 100 miles of the southern border, pressed against the United States as if the rest of the country were simply too much to face. That leaves an enormous amount of space above them, unoccupied, unlit, almost entirely unseen. This journey starts at the edge. Where the Pacific meets the mountains, and a city learns to grow vertically because it has no room to spread. It moves inland, into valleys buried under winter, into plains so flat the wind has nothing to slow it down. Further north, the forests thin. The roads run out. The light disappears for weeks at a time. And somewhere near the top of the world, and where the permafrost runs 600 feet deep and the nearest neighbor is 50 miles away, something quietly shifts. The further in you go, the quieter the world becomes, and the more beautiful. Vancouver occupies 44 square miles between the Coast Mountains and the Pacific Ocean. No room to expand east, no room to expand west. 662,000 people on a narrow strip of flat ground. Geography made that decision, not the city. Most Canadian cities spend half the year fighting winter. Vancouver does not. Even at its coldest, Vancouver has never dropped below minus 17.8 degrees Fahrenheit, mild enough that snow shuts the city down when it actually arrives. The reason is the same mountains that make the city feel compressed. They block the Arctic air that moves across the rest of the country from October to April, keeping it from reaching the coast. The trap is also the shelter. But the mountains extract a cost. Every weather system moving in off the Pacific hits the rock face and rises. As it climbs, it cools and releases its moisture, steadily, continuously, over the city below. Rain here is not seasonal. It falls in November. It falls in February. It falls in April. A temperate rainforest grows directly against the backs of apartment buildings. Residents move through the wet and waterproof layers year-round. Vancouver stopped fighting the rain long ago. It has absorbed it into the architecture, into the routine, into the way people dress and walk and orient their buildings toward whatever gray light is available. Every evening at dusk, a flock of northwestern crows leaves the downtown core and flies back into the old forest. Every night, regardless of what the city has built around them. Winter arrives in Toronto as a physical problem to be solved. Heavy clouds roll off Lake Ontario and unload over a grid of skyscrapers. On the coldest days, Toronto hits minus 31.3 degrees Fahrenheit, but the number understates the danger. When cold air sweeps off the lake and hits the vertical glass walls of the towers, it accelerates through the narrow gaps between them. A minus 10 degree afternoon becomes a minus 25 degree exposure within seconds. Exposed skin loses feeling in minutes. the surface of the city becomes somewhere the human body cannot safely remain. Toronto's answer was not to fight that. It was to leave the surface to the weather entirely. Beneath the frozen streets lies the path, 18.6 miles of underground corridors connecting 50 office towers and multiple subway stations. It is a complete city. Restaurants, pharmacies, banks, barbershops, built so that 2.7 million people could carry on their daily lives as if winter were a condition that applied to some other place. The St. Lawrence River runs like a wind tunnel between steep banks, and in winter, cold air from the North Atlantic pours down the corridor with nothing to slow it. At the end of that corridor, the cliffs of Cap Diamant rise 330 feet above the water. And at the top of those cliffs stands the Chateau Frontenac, a hotel so large it defines the entire Quebec City skyline. In winter, it takes everything the river sends. Winter here reaches minus 33 degrees Fahrenheit. On a cliff above a wind tunnel, that number means something different. When the St. Lawrence accelerates cold air through the corridor and drives it against the vertical face of the building, the exposure approaches an Arctic gale. A century of this, and the chateau is still standing. Its walls are dark red brick, nearly 3 feet thick. Triple pane windows are not an aesthetic choice. Not beautiful, because someone designed it to be beautiful. It is beautiful because it was designed to last, and everything that makes it last also makes it look the way it does. Inside, a fireplace burns in the lobby. Warm air. Through the glass, the storm presses silently against the windows while guests move unhurried through the corridors, entirely insulated from the same weather that shaped every surface they are standing inside. The Sea to Sky Highway is a 59-mile road in British Columbia connecting the coast at Vancouver to the mountain town of Whistler. On a map, it looks like a simple route along the water. On the ground, it climbs from sea level to over 2,200 feet, hugs a sheer rock face above Howe Sound, and passes through 4 distinct climate zones in under 2 hours. At the bottom, the air is wet and mild, Pacific moisture so dense it soaks through a jacket without feeling like rain. Cedars drip. Road surface runs dark with water. 10 miles up, the rain thickens into sleet. 20 miles further, the sleet becomes snow. At the mountain pass, whiteout conditions can close in with no warning visible from below. A driver who left the coast in light fog can arrive at the top inside a full winter storm, raincoast to alpine. The entire transition happens in a single drive. Physics explains it simply. Warm, wet Pacific air moves inland and hits the mountain face. Driving this road means climbing through that process from beginning to end, which is why the bottom and the top feel like different seasons. Whistler Blackcomb is a ski resort 75 miles north of Vancouver. Built into a mountain that sits directly in the path of Pacific storm systems moving onshore. At 7,493 feet, the alpine bowls above the runs receive more than 36 feet of snow every year. Snow arrives in walls, Storms stack the snowpack fast and deep, loading the upper slopes until they reach a point where the weight will release on its own, taking trees, rock, and anything else in the path. Whistler Blackcomb does not wait for that moment. Every morning before the lifts open, ski patrol units move to the top of the runs carrying explosive charges, hand-thrown devices, or rounds fired from artillery pieces mounted on the ridgeline. They detonate them into the loaded slopes deliberately, bring the snow down on a quiet Tuesday morning with no one on the mountain, so that the same slope cannot come down on a crowded Saturday afternoon. The violence is scheduled. That is how the resort stays open. Minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit is the coldest this mountain has measured. The same Pacific systems that deliver rain to the Vancouver coast arrive at this elevation as full storms, dropping snow faster than crews can move it. Below the resort, the town of Whistler sits at the base of a peak that requires active management just to remain safe. The Canadian prairies of Saskatchewan and Manitoba sit on one of the flattest surfaces on Earth. A perfectly flat horizon cuts the sky in half. No mountains, no ridgelines, nothing to interrupt the wind for 932 miles in any direction. That absence is the problem. When the polar vortex pushes south, there is nothing to slow it. Open plains and frozen lake surfaces like Lake Winnipeg create a frictionless runway. Wind accelerates across the ice and hits the highway at full force. Fresh snow is not required for a whiteout. Wind simply picks up the loose ice already lying on the ground and flings it sideways. Visibility drops to 30 feet in seconds. Wind chill reaches minus 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Vehicles on the Trans-Canada Highway disappear into a moving white wall. Mechanical life cannot survive here unaided. Across the region, hundreds of thousands of parking stalls are wired with electrical outlets. Heavy cords hang from car grills and plug directly into wooden posts. At minus 22, engine oil solidifies into wax. A car left unplugged overnight may not start in the morning. Block heaters run for at least 4 hours before the engine will turn over. To protect their homes from the wind, people engineered the landscape itself. Over generations, they planted more than 600 million trees in long, straight rows across the plains. These shelter belts, stark and leafless in winter, are biological walls built to break the wind's momentum before it reaches the house. In the deep north of the Yukon and Northwest Territories, the sun drops below the horizon in November and does not return for over 30 continuous days. The sky goes black. Then, without warning, neon green ribbons of aurora borealis ignite across the darkness, the only light for hundreds of miles in any direction. Temperatures during this period hold below minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold is constant, but the harder challenge for the people who live here is the dark. Beneath the frozen surface lies a deeper problem: permafrost, a layer of soil, rock, and ice that has remained frozen for over 10,000 years plunges 1,969 feet into the earth in places. Not loose ground, it is the foundation everything here is built on. And it is fragile in one specific way. If a heated building sits directly on permafrost, the warmth radiates downward. Frozen ground softens. Structures above begin to tilt, then sink, then collapse into what was solid earth moments before. To prevent this, northern builders do something counterintuitive. They elevate their buildings on steel stilts, leaving a gap beneath the floor so that cold winter air can circulate freely underneath. They drive passive refrigeration pipes called thermosiphons 33 feet into the soil. Tubes that continuously pull heat out of the ground, keeping the permafrost locked solid. Not to warm the surroundings, to keep them frozen. The Arctic fox solves the same problem differently. Weighing between 6.6 and 19.8 pounds, it moves across the permafrost crust without ever breaking it. Light enough that the ground beneath stays intact. No stilts, no pipes. Just weight, distributed carefully across a surface that punishes anything too heavy to carry. The permafrost keeps both of them standing, but further north, there is no ground at all. A sound that carries for miles across the Arctic Ocean. A frozen sea covering 5.4 million square miles at the top of the world. The sky here is steel gray and heavy, pressing down until the horizon disappears entirely. There is no line between the clouds above and the crushed white ice below. A shadowless whiteout, flat, featureless, and disorienting. Travelers on the Arctic Ocean lose their sense of up and down. The surface looks solid. It is not. Beneath the ice lies an abyss, dropping 3,281 feet to the ocean floor, sealed by a layer of sea ice that averages just 6 to 10 feet thick. Ice here is never still. Driven by wind and current, it shifts, collides, and splits open, tearing gaps in what looked, moments before, like solid ground. Jagged ridges of crushed ice push up along the fracture lines. Black water boils up through fresh cracks, releasing columns of sea smoke into the freezing air. 1,000 pounds of polar bear sits motionless at the edge of an open breathing hole, invisible against the whiteout. No fear of the unstable ground. Only patience, waiting for a seal to surface from the dark water below. The Arctic Ocean offers no solid footing. Everything here balances on the edge of what the ice will hold. Newfoundland sits at the eastern edge of Canada, where the continent ends and the North Atlantic begins. Just offshore, the freezing Labrador Current from the Arctic meets the warm Gulf Stream pushing up from the tropics. Where they meet, an enormous amount of moisture settles over this coastline as fog, more than 200 days a year. Not morning fog, not seasonal fog, the kind that swallows icebergs whole as they drift past in spring, making them invisible until a ship is within yards of them. In the worst months, the fog and the sea are the same color, and the horizon disappears. Wooden houses that have survived along these shores all share one feature that does not appear in construction anywhere else in Canada. Steel chains, bolted through the roof and anchored directly into the granite below. Not a precaution. They are how a house stays on the ground. Every house is painted red, yellow, or blue, not for aesthetics, for navigation. When fishermen return from the water and the shore has disappeared behind the gray, they find their way home by color. Brightness cuts through what visibility cannot. A red house on a gray cliff is a lighthouse that runs without electricity. The Atlantic puffin, weighing just 1.1 pounds, solves the same problem from below. When the wind reaches hurricane force, it digs a burrow 3 feet into the earth and disappears underground entirely. Same coast, same storms. The puffin just goes the other direction. At low tide, the chains catch the light against the stone. Fog rolls in from where the two currents meet. The houses hold. The Trans-Canada Highway is 4,860 miles long, the longest national highway on Earth. 10 provinces, mountain ranges, Pacific to Atlantic, and for much of that distance, it sits on bare rock. For a large portion of the route, the asphalt sits directly on the Canadian Shield, ancient granite locked in permafrost, too hard to blast through economically, and too cold to dig a traditional roadbed into. Construction crews had to follow the shape of the rock, laying asphalt only where the frozen earth permitted. The highway traces the landscape, not cuts through it. It rises and dips with contours set 3 billion years before the first truck drove over them. Near White River in Ontario, the local temperature record stands at minus 72 degrees Fahrenheit. At the fuel station there, no driver turns their engine off. Shutting down a heavy diesel in that air means the fluids freeze and the battery dies within minutes. Parking lots run constantly. Dozens of idling trucks sitting in their own exhaust and ice fog, burning fuel just to stay mechanical. That hum runs all night. It is the sound of the road keeping itself alive. From above, the gas station canopy glows faint against the dark. Headlights move through the trees. Then the taiga closes around them, and the lights shrink to nothing, small and temporary against a black expanse that runs north for hundreds of miles without a road, a town, or a light of any kind. The Trans-Canada crosses this landscape the only way it can, one tank at a time. The Athabasca Glacier in Alberta's Columbia icefield is 984 feet deep and moves forward at 49 feet per year, slow enough to look stationary, but carrying enough mass to grind solid bedrock into powder. That powder, called glacial flour, stays suspended in meltwater for miles. Rivers downstream run pale jade instead of clear. Up close, the ice is not white. The surface is layered with dirt and rock ground up from below, carved open by crevasses that glow electric blue from within. Light filtered through hundreds of feet of compressed ice. Even in summer, A katabatic wind falls down the slope, carrying the cold off the glacier face and the low sound of the mass shifting somewhere inside. Not a quiet place. Morph. What makes this glacier unusual is not its size. It is one of the smaller ones in the ice field. It is where the water goes. The Athabasca sits on a triple continental divide, a rare point where meltwater splits toward 3 separate oceans. One trickle goes to the Pacific, another reaches the Arctic, a third eventually finds the Atlantic. A single handful of ice from this surface will reach 3 different seas. Downslope. The terminal moraine marks the old boundary. Raw rock left behind as the glacier pulled back. Beyond it, a line of taiga forest shows how far the retreat has gone. 0.93 miles in 125 years. Taiga is filling the space the ice vacated. The glacier is still advancing. It is retreating faster. The Alberta Badlands begin without warning. Flat wheat prairie ends, and the earth drops away into a canyon of rust, orange, and charcoal rock. Layers of sediment exposed over thousands of years by meltwater and frost, eroding at just 0.4 inches per year. That pace is almost nothing. Over millions of years, it has carved out canyon country the size of South Carolina across southern Alberta. 75 million years ago, this was a warm, swampy rainforest at the edge of a shallow inland sea. Then, the climate shifted, sea retreated, rainforest died. Creatures sank into the sediment and stayed there, slowly mineralized, until the erosion caught up with them. This is not a wasteland. It is a graveyard in the process of being opened. On the canyon floor, the hoodoos rise from the dust, pillars of soft rock capped by harder stone that protected them from erosion while everything around them dissolved. Each one is striped with distinct bands of ancient sediment, each band a different geological era. In summer, the rock radiates heat like a kiln. Stone that holds dinosaur bones also holds the record of every climate that came after them. Paleontologists work the cracked canyon walls with fine brushes, sweeping millennia of dust from exposed bone. These badlands contain the densest concentration of late Cretaceous fossils on Earth. Albertosaurus skeletons emerge from the rock here in numbers, not isolated specimens, but groups. It is suggesting these animals move together. Earth's largest dinosaur graveyard was not discovered. It is still being uncovered. At sunset, the rust orange deepens to red, and the hoodoo shadows stretch long across the valley floor. The canyon holds the quiet of a place where time moves in a different unit. Not years, but erosion. At Lonceau Meadows, on the northern tip of Newfoundland, 8 turf-roofed longhouses sit in a peat bog at the edge of Epaves Bay. A headland jutting straight into the North Atlantic, catching every storm and fog bank that moves in from the open ocean. coastal grasses permanently bent from the wind. The mounds that the longhouses form, low, rounded, covered in new growth each spring, are almost indistinguishable from the natural landscape around them. That is how they were built, not against the land, but from it. The Norse arrived around the year 1000, more than 5 centuries before Columbus. The most capable open ocean navigators of their era, crossing 3,000 miles of North Atlantic in open boats, without instruments. They built the longhouses from timber and sod, cut directly from the bog. Bog iron from the nearby wetlands gave them metal, extracted from waterlogged soil, forged into nails and tools on site. They had crossed the ocean. They were making themselves at home. A decade later, they abandoned the settlement and did not return. No battle, no catastrophe. What the archaeology shows is a supply line stretched across the full width of the North Atlantic. Too far to replace a broken tool, too far to send reinforcements before winter closed in. California and Montana combined would fit inside the Yukon with room to spare, all 186,272 square miles of it. And 75% of the 44,000 people who live here are in a single small city. Whitehorse sits on the bank of the Yukon River, surrounded on every side by mountains. It has coffee shops, grocery stores, street lights. The city's official nickname is the Wilderness City, not a tourism slogan, but a geographic description. Drive 10 minutes out of the center and the infrastructure ends completely. The wilderness does not begin gradually. The Yukon River runs 1,980 miles from the mountains of British Columbia to the Bering Sea, passing directly through Whitehorse on its way. In winter, the river freezes to a depth that supports heavy trucks. Families along its banks have driven on it for generations, using the frozen surface as a highway. When the land routes become impassable, each spring, the ice breaks apart and blocks the size of buildings, crashing and grinding downstream in a single day, flooding the banks and ending the winter road until next year. Winter here has touched minus 81 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, the wood frog, buried under a meter of snow, allows 65% of the water in its body to freeze solid. When spring arrives, the ice inside it melts, the heart restarts, and the frog walks out of the snowbank. The frog does not appear to notice. Above the city, Mount Logan rises to 19,551 feet, the highest peak in Canada, the second highest in North America. It sits inside Quebec National Park, deep enough in the St. Elias Range that it cannot be seen from the surrounding plains. The summit plateau holds temperatures that rival Antarctica. Measurably, the mountain is still getting taller, growing 0.35 millimeters per year. By evening, the cold deepens. Every exhale crystallizes before it disperses, what people here call diamond dust, falling slowly through still air toward the snow below. The Canadian Arctic tundra covers more ground than Mexico and Central America combined. The point at the top of the continent where the boreal forests finally give out. The permafrost runs hundreds of feet deep, and the wind moves across a flat white surface with nothing to stop it. In winter, the sun stays below the horizon. At minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit, the air itself feels solid. The landscape does not look like it is waiting for spring. It looks like it has stopped expecting it. Below the blowing snow, permafrost acts as an impenetrable layer. Frozen soil and ice locked so deep and so hard that tree roots cannot reach through it. Without trees, there is no windbreak. Without a windbreak, Arctic air moves at full velocity across the entire surface, unobstructed in every direction, stripping the landscape down to its essential state. Cold here spreads evenly, across every hollow, every valley, every open stretch. The only things that survive are the ones that have stopped trying to resist. 40,000 Inuit live across this territory. They do not insulate themselves from the environment. They build themselves into it. Double-layered animal furs, with the inner layer facing the skin, trap the body's own heat against it. Raw meat, not by preference, but because nothing grows here that contains vitamin C, and cooking destroys what little the meat provides. A biological response to the same geology that makes farming impossible. Permafrost, that prevents agriculture, also determines what goes into the body. We began beneath the streets of Toronto, inside a network of tunnels where 2.7 million people built an underground city to escape the surface. We end here at the edge of a frozen ocean, where 40,000 people have built their lives directly on top of it. Canada does not defeat life, it filters it. Cold, distance, permafrost, darkness. None of these are hostile in the way a storm is hostile. They are indifferent. They apply the same pressure to everything, and what remains is whatever has found a way to meet those conditions. A frog that has learned how to die and start again. A bear that has learned how to wait. A house painted red so a fisherman can find it in the fog. Steel cables bolted into granite so the wind cannot tear a roof away. 8 longhouses built by Vikings and abandoned when the supply line could no longer hold. The bargain is always the same: adapt completely or leave. Across 3.86 million square miles of this country, every living thing has made that choice in its own way. Somewhere else on this planet right now, beneath a different sky, another landscape is applying that same pressure, demanding the same negotiation, producing the same kinds of quiet, extraordinary solutions that no one outside of it would ever think to invent. The deeper you go, the quieter the world becomes, and the more beautiful it becomes. If you had to stand in one place on this journey to test the limits of who you are, where would it be? Thank you for traveling with us every mile of the way. Your time means more to us than we can express. God bless you. God bless your family. And God bless every journey you take. If this journey moved you, share it with your family, your friends, with anyone who deserves to experience it. Subscribe and join us on the next one. We have something special waiting for you ahead.